Adrian Ann Breitfelder, City Clerk, you are hereby directed to call a special session of the City Council to be held on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, at 6:30 p.m. in the historic Federal Building for the purpose of setting the public hearing to establish the maximum property tax dollars for fiscal year 2023.
Thank you. Good evening, and welcome to a special session of the Dubuque City Council for February 3rd, 2022. As a reminder to viewers and listeners, due to the nature of tonight's meeting topic, public input is not accepted. However, you may contact the City Council directly from the city's webpage at www.cityofdubuque.org/council-contacts. Attendance for the session is as follows. Mayor Kavanaugh,
Here?
Council members Farber,
Here.
Jones,
Here.
Resnick,
Here.
Roussel,
Here.
Sprank,
Here.
City Manager Van Milligan,
Here.
City Attorney Brumwell.
Here.
Thank you. We'll move on to our agenda item. Under item set for public hearing, we have set public hearing for resolution establishing maximum property tax dollars for fiscal year 2023 for February 16th, 2022.
Okay, and I will take a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, Mr. Jones.
I move that we set the public hearing, adopt the resolution, and set the public hearing for the date of February 16th in this room.
Okay, would you like to add receive and file to that motion as well?
Even file would be good to add to that motion as well.
Thank you.
Second that.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Jones, a second by Mr. Sprank. We'll have a couple of presentations tonight to start off the discussion, and then we'll bring the discussion back to the table. So our first presentation will be from our city assessor, Mr. Troy Patzer.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. I will just give a kind of a brief presentation discussing the city valuations for the 2021 year. So we'll just kind of first start off with the primary duties of the assessor, just go over that. The primary duties are to determine the class and value of all real property within the jurisdiction. So for myself, that would be everything within the city limits of Dubuque, determine the class and set a value on those properties. The properties that we would set values on are the five primary value classes that we use would be commercial, industrial, agricultural, residential, and multi-residential. All these classes, except for the agricultural, are based at 100% market value. So for values, the effective date for our assessments that we work in is January 1 of each year. And the properties are revalued every 2 years. So our methods for valuing are three approaches to valuation, or the market approach, cost approach, and the income approach. On the market approach, we analyze the sales of comparable properties that have recently sold and estimate the probable sales price of that property to set that value. The other approach is the cost approach, which is an estimate of the cost of the labor and materials that it would take to replace a property, applying an appropriate amount of depreciation, and then adding the land value to it. And then the third approach is the income approach, which is primarily used for income-producing properties, such as, say, an office or an apartment building, something of that nature. Our method in kind of for mass appraisal and how we come up with values is we're really based off of the cost approach. We use the Iowa Department Revenue has a cost manual, so we use the state manual to come up with the value on every improvement on each parcel. And then we use, to get to the market, we use sales and then make adjustments based off of that cost approach. And that's the method that we use in mass appraisal for the most part. If it is an income-producing property, we would do that same method using the cost approach and then applying some factors based off of income and expense information that we would receive from a property owner. So our revaluation cycle. So Iowa law requires that all real properties to be reassessed every 2 years in the odd number year. So for 1/1 of 21 valuations, that was a revaluation year. The Iowa Department of Revenue compares the values of the sales and from each class of property using an assessment ratio. And this assessment ratio is the assessed value divided by the sale price. So for each sale that goes on for the 1/1 to 21 valuations, we looked at the 2020 sales. And then look at the sales from each class of property. So for each sale that was designated as a normal arm's length sale, and that sale is determined, first off, is determined in our office when we get the declaration of value statement from the recorder's office. We look at that DOV, as we call the declaration of value. We take that form, we have to input some of the information like our assessed value. We make an initial determination between the information that was provided on that form and then any contact then that we make with the seller and or the buyer. And then we put a sales condition code on that. So if it didn't appear like it was a normal sale, if it was a sale between, let's say, family members, we code it as a family sale. That goes to the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue reviews those, and then we kind of go back and forth on that. If they disagree with us, there's times where we can agree or disagree on those sales. So all of those sales get added up in that class of property that are designated as the normal arm's length sales. So for residential, we had 1,035, I believe it was, 4,032 for 2020. They rank each one of those on that assessment ratio. So if you had a house that had a value of sold for $100,000 and you had $95,000 on it, it'd be that assessed value is 95,000 divided by the 100,000. Our assessment ratio for that sale would be 95%. So we were 5% less than what the sale price was. So that's how the Department of Revenue looks at that. If that median sales ratio, when they rank all them from low to high, is not between 95 and 105, they adjust it, make an adjustment with that with an equalization order. Our intent is if we have enough sales, is to always make adjustments internally, feeling that's more equitable, break it down, look at individual neighborhoods, and to see what adjustments we need to make if we have enough sales to determine so. So the Dubuque City Assessor's Office made adjustments to each class of property for 2021 so that the median sales ratio would fall within the parameters required by law. So then let's just kind of go over the tax cycle timing on, there's this lag in period where, we come up with a value based off of previous year's sales, and then from when the actual taxpayer is paying on that valuation. So for the January 1st, 2021 assessed value is established, which would mean any construction and changes that we would make during that 2020 calendar year. Then for this year that we're working with, the 2021 year, was an equalization year. So on September of 2021, the final equalization orders were issued from the Department of Revenue. The only order that we received in the city of Dubuque was agricultural land and buildings need to be decreased 10%. We made an estimate that we didn't have. There were some numbers that weren't reported yet from the reporting sites that we use through ISU and USDA. So we had to make some estimations on the, actually with the county assessor, previous county assessor was the one that did most of the work. So on that, and we had to make some estimations on that, and we figured we needed to increase a couple of percent. When they came back, we estimated too high, so we had an order to reduce 10%. Not a lot of agricultural properties in Dubuque, so it didn't really affect the overall taxable value out there. And then in October 27th, the rollbacks are established for each classification. The rollback is applied, and now to each of those values, and then now we know what the taxable values are. July 1 of 2021 through 6/30 of 2022 is the ownership and accrual period. So anytime there's going to be a transaction that's happened, that's when at the close of the sale, that's when they'll estimate prorating the taxes. That's based off that ownership period. Time frame that we're in right now, January, February, March. Budget hearings to determine the revenue needs. These revenue needs will then determine the levy rate. July, usually towards the end of July, beginning of August, is when the tax bills will be calculated and mailed out to the owners. And then the tax bills for this cycle that we're in right now will be due in September of 2022 and March of 2023. So that's the whole tax cycle timing for the 2021 values. So when I was mentioning the rollback, what's the rollback? So Section 441.21 of the Iowa Code provides for a reduction of property tax valuations. And what it's intended for is to cushion the impact of inflation. So the Department of Revenue is the one that computes this assessment. They have limitations on the amount that it can increase. So for residential, it's locked in at 3% allowable growth for any individual years, all they'll allow for on residential and agricultural. And then the county auditors will multiply the assessed valuations by that rollback factor. Now that determines the taxable valuations. So some notes on residential for the 2021 assessment year. So yes, it was a reassessment year. There were significant assessed value changes made in Dubuque. There was a lot of sales, like I mentioned before. We had 1,032 sales versus the previous year. We had 863. So there was a lot of. These were just the normal arm's length transactions. There was more sales than that transpired, but the normal arm's length transactions that the Department of Revenue deemed as normal were 1,032 of them. Over the 863 that were from the previous year, so there was a lot of volume of sales, and the sales prices were quite a bit higher than our assessed values were. So the average increase was 8.9% due to revaluation for the city. Some properties received more, some less, and that was based on the sales in each individual neighborhood. When I was mentioning that before and how those assessed values are compared to the sales prices, we'll look at the sales in each neighborhood, each of those 50 neighborhoods, look at what that median ratio is, and then make a determination how we need to adjust each area of town in that mapping neighborhood. Overall, for the beginning of at the beginning of the year, since it's every odd year, so at the beginning, just for information here, for the beginning of 2021, our ratio was 92.5% based off those 2019 sales. At the end of at the beginning of 2020, it was 92.5. So at the end of 2020, with those 1,032 sales, our ratio had gone from 92.5 down to 87.3. So that's where we needed to make adjustments to get back up between that 95 and 105 range. That revaluation added about $304 million of assessment increase, and that was, like I said, based on getting into that 95 and 105 range. So the rollback will still play a role in tax calculations. So this year, the residential parcels received 54.13% of rollback factor, and last year the rollback factor was 56.41. So we're going to take a look at how this will affect the taxable values. So here's an example of that. So last year, we're just assuming, let's just assume they had an assessed value of a property at $100,000. That rollback factor of the 0.564094 gave a taxable value of $56,409. So for this year meaning the 2021 valuations, using that 8.9% average increase, that new assessed value is $108,900. Take it times the rollback factor of the 0.541302, gives you a taxable value of $58,947. So that percent of change, there's the 8.9%. The rollback factor decreased 4.4%, and the taxable value increased 4.5%. So just some notes on multi-residential, commercial, and industrial parcels. Based on the 2020 sales, there were now widespread revaluation changes made. They were only parcel-specific changes. There was a few certain types of properties, certain maybe little areas that we need to make some adjustments and changes on, but based on the limited number of sales that we had in those classes of property and where they ranked at, there wasn't any widespread overall across the board revaluation needed on those. Looking at the rollback factors for those classes of property. So multi-residential, the parcels will receive a 63.75% rollback factor. Last year, the rollback factor was 67.5. This represents a 5.6% decrease in the taxable valuations with the multi-res parcels. This still goes off of the, when multi-residential was part of commercial, and they took multi-residential, and I guess I'll just kind of go back to multi-residential means any units that are 3+ dwelling units on one parcel, manufactured homes, parks are part of that, and so are nursing assisted living type of homes. Those are also in multi-residential. Those were all part of commercial at one time, and I believe in 2015 that was taken out and broken out into multi-residential. And since 2015, that rollback factor is decreased, that goes down that 3.75% every year from that 90% that it started with. So that's why this year it's receiving the 63.75% that was initially, that's what was set when they created the law to take commercial into multi-res and change it into multi-residential. So the commercial industrial parcels will remain at 90% with the state. That's locked in at the state's has for that rollback factor. And most of that original, since commercial and industrial was all at 100% at one time, they reduced it to 90%, and the state is still reimbursing it to that historical factor, so we're still being reimbursed for a good portion of that. I'll get to this in a second of how that will be going away, though. So the assessed value added for 2021 due to new construction. This includes all partially exempt and TIF districts. So for agricultural, at $138,890 due to new construction, $17,862,870 in residential, $845,790 in multi-res, $19,062,880 in commercial, and $67,880 in industrial parcels. So 2021 overall assessed value changes. Agricultural decreased 5.2%. This is based off of from the 21 to the 20 valuations. Residential overall increased 10.3% in assessed values. Multi-res 2.9%. Commercial 2.2%, and industrial there was no change, negligible change in that. So for new legislation, when I was mentioning before that multi-residential is going down that 3.75% every year. It was in that original, I believe it was Senate File 295 when that was passed, and it took multi-residential, created multi-residential. They deemed in there by 2022 it would have to equal residential. So then this last year they asked if it could just, the Department of Revenue asked the legislature actually if they would just take multi-residential and move it into residential. Then that takes away the whole issue we have with equalization. When you originally had commercial, multi-residential part of commercial, you had a little bigger base of sales. And when you broke multi-residential away from commercial, most of the jurisdictions throughout the state just don't have enough, basically apartment sales, to really know where you're standing on it. So with that's made some difficulties during that whole equalization cycle. So now multi-residential is going to be in with residential, and it will see that same residential rollback going forward now. And then Senate File 619 is the reduction and eventual elimination of the commercial and industrial backfill. That was that original 100% factor that commercial and industrial was. Now it's 90%. The state was reimbursing back at that historic level from when they initially created that. But they're going to be eliminating that by 2029. They're going to take off 1/8 every year. It's going to be reduced by 1/8, and in 2029 that will be eliminated. So my hope with that, and I best maybe probably their actuaries or someone that was working on that, was that maybe growth will outpace that or at least equal that, so there may not be a taxable valuation deficit in that class of property. I'm just kind of speculating here, but that's probably the intent of doing it over an 8-year period. So looking ahead, the January 1st, 2022 valuations, which is everything that just happened in this 21 calendar year, it's most properties will not really see a valuation change since it wasn't a revaluation year. So unless somebody did a parcel-specific change on their property, built a new house, added something on, took something away, did something of that nature, would obviously create a change. And the multi-res will get a notice saying they're now residential, but overall, there won't be widespread valuation changes. Like I mentioned, multi-res now becomes part of the residential ones, and the rollback's going to match residential properties. So one other thing, I guess, quick on that, with that being said, kind of questioning that multi-res, what that does with the overall percentage-wise, multi-residential, the taxable valuation that is for, that the city of, that's in the city of Dubuque here, the taxable valuation for multi-res is, there's 122, a little over $122 million of the whole, looking at all of the taxable value that's out there, even including, say, all the utilities, so railroads, utility companies, they're all centrally assessed, but that's taxable valuation coming in. So using all that, multi-res makes up 4.5, right at 4.5% of the whole. So, I mean, that'll be reduced some, but it doesn't make up a big piece of the whole, you know, of the whole pie. So just to kind of give you some information on that. So any other questions or?
Yeah, thank you, Troy. We appreciate the presentation. We'll hold discussion till later, but any questions for Troy while we have him up here? Yeah, Mr. Resnick.
Mayor, thank you. Just a question about how, you know, the valuations as far as in real life, what citizens pay for property has kind of gone up quite rapidly in the last year. Do you anticipate that that effect happening for a little this year, a little next year? Or is that going to be spaced out, or is it going to be is that going to affect the evaluations that you give us as quickly as it affected, you know, our citizens who are buying property?
Yeah, good question on that, Dave. So just to give you an example, I wrote that down on sales and residential properties in 2021. Also had a higher volume of sales. It was up about, I think, another 5%. We had 1,072 normal arm's length sales. Our ratios, when we're using that same median, looking at that median ratio, after we made adjustments for the 1/1/21 valuations, we were at about 98% was our median ratio at the group of sales. So we were at 87.3, and we got it to, I believe it was 97.8. So then looking at now the 2021 sales that have happened with those new 21 valuations that were put on there, our ratio has gone down to 85.9. So yeah, at that rate right now, we would have to increase, I think it was to get from 85.9 to 100%. If you were going right to 100%, we would have to add, I believe it's around 17% to get to that. If this was 2022 was a revaluation year. It not being so, there won't be, you know, I won't be putting a 20% overall, you know, increase on homes throughout the city here. But based off of that, if the market stays where it's at even, there'll have to be that increase going forward. Or if it does the same thing in this next year, that could be some, you know, huge increases. So, you know, with that being said, though, just because the increases of assessments go up, there is when I was explaining with that rollback factor, there's that rollback factor to look at. The state only allows that 3% allowable growth overall statewide. So how that can be changed from throughout jurisdiction to jurisdiction is if one jurisdiction was a lot higher than what the average was or a lot lower, that rollback factor could really, you know, make a difference between one jurisdiction and the other. But overall, let's just say that, I'm just using a number here, but let's just say overall everybody had to increase for the 23 valuations had to increase 15%, and we increased 15%. Well, they're only going to allow 3%, so that rollback factor is really going to, you know, take effect. You know, instead of being at 55%, it may have to be at 45%. Or I'm just, you know, speculating here, but it would have to take effect that way. So that's where that rollback factor helps with numbers when sales have really inflated a lot. And then when you have that much, even if the rollback factor doesn't play into that, where you do have a lot more taxable valuation, you know, then there's more taxable value out there. So overall, does that make all of those levying authorities, you know, city, county, you know, schools, everybody's, you know, budget that's in part of that, then if their levy would go down then some, then, you know, that may not, because there's that much more taxable value out there. So that's another piece of it too.
All right, thank you for that information.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Troy? Yeah, Mr. Spricer.
Yeah. Tony, could you mentioned about the multi-residential is now going to be classified as residential. And you mentioned that's going to change. I kind of missed, you mentioned 4.5%.
So, okay, yeah, that was,
Explain that a little bit more. Yeah.
so when I was saying that so when multi-residential becomes residential, and it's going to get the residential rollback. So that rollback factor currently for multi-residential is at that 63, I believe it was at 63.75, and residential rollback factor being at that right around 55%. I don't know what it's going to do next year, the rollback factor will. My guess is maybe goes to 56%, something of that nature, but it's going to equal that. So there's going to be a drop in taxable valuation from multi-res because they're going to go from 60-some percent probably to 50-some percent. So they're probably going to be 10% less, guessing here, 10, 12, somewhere in there, percent less taxable value in multi-res. But the overall, if you took every class of property, res and multi-res, I had from another presentation, I could have put that on there, a little pie chart that would really show that a little better. But, residential, commercial, industrial, residential makes up the big portion, but commercial, industrial, and multi-residential is a pretty small chunk of that. That's only 4.5% of the overall taxable value out there. So just because if that's going to go down about 10%, it's not really 10% of the overall value that's out there, taxable value that's out there.
Okay. And so those property owners that do own multi-residential, they will be seeing a tax deduction?
So for 2022, since I'm not making overall blanket increases for a revaluation due to market, their valuations won't change. Changing them into residential may change that value a little bit, but it's not going to, I'm not going to be making a market adjustment on them. So they're going to have less taxable value, so I'm assuming their taxes would be less for that next year, yes. And if you look at the trend, every year, overall, there was some years in 2019, we had to increase about 20% in the city here for multi-res based off of 2018 sales. So that year, their taxes went back up, but their taxes were actually about the same as what they were from 3 or 4 years before that when they were still in the commercial one. So they went down, then they went back up again based off of sales, and then they've kind of gone back down again. So eventually in the long picture, going from the original commercial rate at 100% down to 50%, they've gone down.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Mike.
So if I could follow up on Troy's answer there. So if you were to adopt the recommendation that's being made tonight, and which will hold a public hearing on in a week or so, the average multi-residential property would see a 7.2% drop in their property tax payment.
All right. Any other questions? We have Troy up here. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Troy. Really appreciate the time,
Yeah, you bet.
all the information.
Yeah, you bet. No problem. Like I said, anytime, reach out to me too. If you have questions on anything, feel free.
All right.
So, all right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So our next presentation will actually be the city manager. So Mike, when you're ready to go, you can go for it.
Thank you. They're going to load up my PowerPoint here.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask Mr. Van Milligan a question while we're waiting?
Sure. Yeah.
Mr. Van Milligan, while we're waiting, could you tell us where Mr. Passner stays, or where is he located in the staff? Is he a staff member of yours, or he's separate from you? Because he just invited us to call him, and generally we go through you.
So Troy is the city assessor, and so he does not work for the city. And so, it's a separate board of directors, which consists of the city council and the school, the taxing bodies, basically.
Correct.
The elected officials of the taxing bodies serve as his board of directors in a separate organization. So anybody can contact Troy directly and ask him questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Ready when you are, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And now I'm going to make a presentation about the property tax levy that I'm asking you to set a public hearing for. And I'll try and in this presentation explain how this process works. But Mike Van Milligan, the city manager. But first, I would like to acknowledge that here tonight to help me answer questions, and the one who put all this together is our Finance and Budget Director, Jennifer Larson. And as we all know, we have an award-winning finance director. In 2021, she was picked by the Women's Leadership Network for the Woman of Achievement Award for Organizational Impact. And boy, that sure fits her. And as you're also aware, every year, our annual audit receives an award, a national award. And every year, our annual budget receives a national award. And so these are reviewed by national organizations that believe they meet a standard that it should be recognized, the work that she does. And as you can imagine, over the last 21 months, as we've all navigated this COVID madness and all the financial impacts of that on individuals, businesses, and governments, Jennifer has done an extraordinary job of helping us as an organization and a community navigate that. You'll remember when in March of 2020, everything started to shut down and cities across the country were laying off employees and things like that. That wasn't us. We did some things, some dramatic things like freezing vacancies and not replacing equipment that was scheduled to be replaced and canceling capital improvement projects. But Jennifer presented a plan to the mayor and city council where there were no employee layoffs. And as we know, the COVID pandemic continues to this day, and so it continues to present its many challenges. This year, as Jennifer put this budget together, I would say the challenges were even higher because, as we know, there's workforce shortages across the country and across our community. And Jennifer had some short staffs in her department, as a matter of fact, specifically in the budget division. And we were fortunate that a former finance department employee who works in Public Works now as the Assistant Public Works Director, Ariel Swift, volunteered to pitch in and help. But in fact, Jennifer had to do most of this, and I'm just going to use round numbers, $200 million budget herself over the last several months and put that together in partnership with our department managers. And so I would applaud Jennifer for all of her efforts. And I think once again, she has created a budget recommendation that I think we should all be proud of. And I, of course, hope that once you hear what we have to say tonight, that you'll agree to set the public hearing on the tax rate that we're recommending. And then the mayor and council is going to hold 6 public meetings and a public meetings and a public hearing on the budget so they can get public input to actually what ends up in the budget and make a decision by the end of March of how much money is going to be spent and what's it going to be spent on. But now for tonight's requirement, this is a requirement of state law. It was just a new state law adopted a few years ago. The mayor and council used to adopt the property tax levy at the end of the budget process when they heard what all the needs were and the potential resources from many different sources, not just property taxes. And the state said, well, no, we're going to change that. The city council has to decide at the beginning of the process what the property tax levy is going to be, and then hold all your hearings and find out what all the needs are. Sorry if I feel like it's backwards, but it doesn't matter. It's a state law. And so that's the position we're in tonight. So we're asking you to set a public hearing tonight on the property tax levy that we're going to recommend. And we're hoping that we've done a good job of, when we put this levy together, while the final budget recommendation is not complete and you haven't got it yet, you won't get it for a couple weeks, Jennifer had to get it to the point of where she's fairly certain of what we're going to recommend to decide on this property tax levy recommendation. And so our hopes are that we did a good job of meeting your goals and priorities that you set back in August. And we're going to end up wrapping up with that at the end of this presentation. So we'll get another chance to talk about that in a little bit. Here is the list of priorities, top priorities and high priorities that you did establish. And I will tell you that we did a better job hitting some of them than we did on others. And as I said, we still are finalizing the final recommendation, and we actually don't even know for certain yet what all the resources are, because not all the different federal agencies and everything have reported to us yet. So we're hoping by the time we give you the recommendation in about 2 weeks that we do have all those final numbers. Otherwise, of course, we'll just have to project them. I think it's important people realize the position that our community is in. So people who grew up here or lived here in the 1980s realize what happened in the economic crisis of the 80s, where the city of Dubuque had the highest unemployment rate in the country, lost 10% of our population. And this is just a chart that shows the steady decline in population, which happened during that 14-year period, actually starting in the 70s and going through the 80s. And then in fact, in the early 90s, we actually started to climb out of that hole. And in about 2010, 2011, we, for the first time over this 37-year period, exceeded that number that we were at before the decline started. And we continue to see an increase in population. And when you read about some of the national statistics about some of these fast-growing cities, you might think, well, that's okay. I'm sure that's the way it works, right? Well, I'm going to show you in a few minutes that, no, that's not the way it works in a lot of places. So it takes a lot of community effort and determination to make what I just showed you work. I built the budget, as I said, around your priorities, but these are some themes that I have in this budget. Community safety, roads and infrastructure, economic development, improved customer service, high quality of life in an equitable community, and identifying and funding important initiatives to support employees. And I'm going to try in this PowerPoint to just use some examples of each of one. It's not exhaustive list. You'll see that when you get the whole budget. Matter of fact, I don't talk at all tonight. Well, not at all. I talk very little tonight about the capital improvement program budget. And I don't talk almost not at all about the enterprise funds like the water department and the sanitary sewer and the storm sewer and parking and those, because they do not impact generally the property tax levy. And this tonight is mostly about property tax levies. So under the classification of community safety, you'll see that I'm recommending that we add 7 new firefighter positions. Now, you'll remember that a few years ago, the mayor and council decided, hey, we are going to have a new West End fire station at some point within the next 5 to 6 years. And so we began a process to add 1 firefighter a year. Well, we got 2 years in a row where we added 1, and then the pandemic hit. So we stopped adding 1 because we didn't have any money. So what I would like to do is not only go get back on track there, but I would like us to just add what we're talking about adding all in one fell swoop. Well, why would I do that? Because right now we have, staff 2 ambulances 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And what we would like to do, and the plan is when there's a new fire station, there would be a 3rd ambulance staffed 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I would like to not wait for the new fire station and purchase an additional ambulance and staff it. And to do that, it's 3 24-hour shifts is the way our system is broken up. You need 6 firefighters to do that. As I mentioned, we have already added 2. So 4 of these 7 are so that we can, starting next year, staff a third ambulance 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. That accomplishes two really big goals. One is it makes the 2 ambulances we have less busy. And so when a person's assigned a shift to work 24 hours, guess what? There is some sleep time supposed to be in that shift. And there is some training time during the day that's in those shifts. And when you're constantly answering ambulance calls, you have less time for those training. Because remember, you're also a firefighter. You're not just a paramedic. And also, there's less downtime for you to recover from all the activities that you're doing. So a third ambulance on all the time will split the calls 3 ways instead of 2 ways. The other thing is the third ambulance will be stationed on the fire station we have that's farthest west. So it will have better coverage on the west end of our community. Remember, when we build a new fire station, it also will be on the west end, and that's where this new ambulance would end up at. Then 3 of the firefighter positions are assigned. Remember, I told you there's 3 separate 24-hour shifts that people are assigned to. 1 firefighter would be assigned to each of those 3 shifts. We would keep the same minimum number of firefighters that have to be on each day. So what that creates is an opportunity for our firefighters to take vacations, or if they have a sick time, or if they're on parental leave, or whatever it happens to be. Because if you look at our demands on overtime over the last 5 years, it's really been what I would consider to be an unreasonable expectation of our employees, the amount of overtime they were forced to work. So people could do things like take vacations. And so adding a firefighter to each one of the 3 shifts will allow them greater opportunity to have downtime, which we all need, but you especially need when you're in a really super demanding profession like that. In the area of the 911 center, we have full-time positions and part-time positions. So the 911 emergency center manager would like to add a full-time position and eliminate some of the part-time hours because we have more turnover in our part-time people, and this is a pretty important position there where you have to be fully trained and skilled. And we have a harder time recruiting part-time people, especially in this workforce environment. So while he asked for 2, I am only recommending 1, and we'll reduce some hours of part-time people, and so and add a full-time position. Then in the police department, we have a recommendation to equip our police officers with tasers. And the beauty of the taser, and our county sheriff's department has been carrying them for quite some time, so we know how they work, besides their national reputation and, of course, their marketing. What they do is they protect both the officers and uncooperative suspects from significant injury. And actually, it can go so far as to reduce the incidence of the use of deadly force. And so we believe that equipping our police officers with tasers, which is a non-lethal method of subduing a suspect, is a good thing. We also are talking about continuing our deployment of security cameras throughout our community. And then we're also talking about a significant enhancement. Right now, our police officers carry body cameras, and our police cars have video cameras. And we're talking about replacing and enhancing that system where there's actually more coordination. And an example I can give is back to the tasers, where, and we haven't picked the system yet, but one of the systems, the way it works, is when an officer deploys the taser, it automatically turns on every police body camera and every police car camera within a certain distance. So you go from 1 camera on the officer making the arrest to maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 cameras all of a sudden all came on and see the incident from multiple angles. And that all happens automatically. Nobody has to do anything. But also the technology in both the body camera and car camera has has improved significantly since we originally did our purchases. And so we'll be recommending that we replace that system of cameras. And then I talked about in the beginning of the pandemic, and as opposed to doing layoffs, what we did was we froze vacant positions. And that all sounds really good till you get to what's called civil service. And to replace a police officer or a firefighter, you have to go through the civil service system. And while it certainly has some merits, it's slow as molasses. And so right now, we've got 16 vacancies in our police department that we're working to fill through that system. And so we have specialty assignments in our police department that just aren't filled right now because we need everybody that we can get to be on the street in patrol or be in investigations. And so I'm working, not just I am, but Shelley Stickford and Keisha Doherty from Human Resources, Jennifer Larson from Finance, and myself and Police Chief Jeremy Jensen and others are working to accelerate the filling of these vacancies over the next year. So our goal by the end of this calendar year is to have 0 police department vacancies. And so then all our specialty assignments will be able to be filled, but same thing back to the discussion about the fire department. It creates a greater opportunity for our police officers to get time off and relax and recharge like everybody needs to do. We're also, as you approved in the current year budget, the Office of Shared Prosperity and Neighborhood Support. So we'll be recruiting those. Of course, I hired Anderson Sansi as the director, and some internal people have been transferred into his department, but the new positions that were created, we're in the process of filling those right now. And then in the current year budget, you approved 2 positions. One was to a position to divert people from the criminal justice system, and another was a position to work with agencies in our community to create opportunities for community service. So those diverted people have somewhere to still contribute back for whatever the issue was that they'd been brought into the system in the first place. And so we're going to assign those 2 positions to the AmeriCorps section of the Leisure Services Department, and we're going to retitle that section Community Partnerships and Diversion Division. So they'll still manage the 60-plus AmeriCorps members, but they'll also have these 2 new positions working on these opportunities to create this diversion system. And then in the area of roads and infrastructures, as you know, we've had some banner years recently with the $150 million Southwest Arterial, the opening of the recent opening of the Highway 20 Swiss Valley Interchange, and the reconstruction of Chavanel Road. The mayor and council was able, normally the Public Works Department resurfaces 5 miles of streets a year. This year you were able to find money to do 10 miles, and next year's budget, there'll be a proposal to continue that for another year because we found additional dollars for that. And then also we'll be spending over $8 million to resurface the Northwest Arterial from JFK to Highway 20. We'll also be proposing tens of millions of dollars, hopefully with federal support, to upgrade and extend the city's water distribution system along the new Southwest Arterial and to connect to 61-151 water line, and that's, of course, next to our new industrial park. In the area of economic development, we are planning investments in downtown, the Central Avenue corridor, Schmidt Island, Access, and the West End industrial parks, specifically the property we just purchased, Crossroads. Our goal will be to finish phase one project, which will make 30 acres available for development. And then other infrastructure investments to support economic development and growth. For instance, the work we're going to be doing on the Catfish Creek sanitary sewer system. In the area of improved customer service, we're going to be recommending that we implement citywide automated collection of refuse carts. As the last time we brought to this council, the pre-pandemic, the council asked about doing a pilot program first, so we've completed that. We own one of these trucks. We've got hundreds of these carts already distributed throughout our community, and it works. It works very well, and it's not only improves customer convenience and neighborhood appearance, but it's a huge increase for the safety of our refuse collection staff. Trying to remember the number, if you count the number of stops they do a day and then you take it out over an entire year, it's like 175,000 times a year they get in and out of that truck today. And this will eliminate almost every one of those in and outs because the arm will pick up the cart and tip it, and it's all controlled from a joystick inside the truck. And we'll be able to mitigate the impact on our refuse collection customers by allocating about $1 million in ARPA funds that were given to us by the federal government to buy the carts. And the high quality of life in an equitable community, we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in the parks and trail systems in this budget. And we're also recommending that the federal government last year declared Juneteenth as a federal holiday, and we're recommending that the city of Dubuque adopt it as a city paid holiday for our employees. In the area of initiatives to support employees, a lot of what I've already talked about is those initiatives, like in fire and police and other places. But there's other things we're recommending, and some of them you've already approved by amendment. So a creation of a project manager in leisure services, 2 new human resources department positions you've already approved since January 1st. But through this budget process, we're recommending the creation of an assistant fixed-based operator position at the airport, an additional secretary position in the city clerk's office to increase customer service. In the sustainability department, a new climate action plan coordinator to work on implementation of the climate action plan with our sustainability coordinator. With the MFC, the Teen Resiliency Corps, and in the a grant analyst in the city manager's office to assist Terry Goodman with the work she's doing to help not only the city government, but also all the not-for-profits in our community access all these trillions of dollars of grant programs that have been created at the federal and state level. And so while Justin has already started with the city, that was a temporary position, and we're recommending through this budget that it be made a permanent position for at least the next 3 years as we work with these not-for-profits to access these grants. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be requesting on Monday night's council agenda that March 21st, I think it is, no, March 7th, one of those, that we have a work session where Terry and Justin can explain to you what we are doing to work with these not-for-profits and our city organization to access all these grants. And they just sponsored a meeting, and they had, I can't remember, I think it was 180 people came representing the not-for-profits in our community and spent 2 or 3 hours at NICC learning about how do you access these federal and state grants. And we've created a website with a database on it, who's gotten grants, what grants are available, what grant writers are available. So we are creating a very, very sophisticated process to make sure over the next 5 to 7 years, Dubuque is one of the big winners as in an effort to attract these federal and state dollars that have been created. Other new positions is a utility locator position, full-time position in engineering. You know, we talk about over the next 3 years that Imon Communication has agreed to bring fiber optic to every home and business in town. Well, you combine that with other firms that are also doing things related to them, like Lion Energy is putting a fiber across the entire city, not across the city, but I mean through the city. And there's all kinds of other businesses that are doing their own work. And then, of course, there's natural gas pipelines and water lines and sewer lines and all these things that are being changed and modified and fixed all the time. And you're required by law to, within a certain period of time, to provide a locate before that dig happens. And if you don't, you accept 100% of the liability for anything that goes wrong. And so we're going to have a super challenge keeping up if we don't have more help to do it. The fire department asked for more hours for their medical director, which is an outside person. It's not a city employee, but we contract with a medical director to help them in their paramedic work. Information services, while they asked for 4 new positions, I'm recommending 2. And the library, who has that maker space they created a few years ago, they had a part-time person that helps people in the maker space, and it does take help, especially when kids are using it. And they are kind of frustrated with the level of turnover because it's only a part-time position, and so we're going to be recommending that be made a full-time position. In Public Works has asked for another part-time secretary to handle all the demand they get from snow calls and refuse calls and street calls and every call. So I'm recommending that. And then the fire department is asked to implement a health and wellness program, and I'm recommending that we fund that. Now, there's going to be lots of opportunities for grants and forgivable loans with these trillions of dollars that are coming out of the federal and state government through the specifically through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the ARPA money, and other programs that are just being created, or existing programs that are now have a lot more money available in them, and so there's more opportunities to apply for grants. So what are some of the challenges that relate to that? Is the people that are going to get those grants are going to be the ones that are ready for them. And so to be ready for them, you have to spend money. You have to do planning. You have to do conceptual design. Some of them you have to do full design to have a competitive grant application, even though you don't know if you're going to get the grant. And you have to spend the money to be ready. And then we've already been notified that the state of Iowa is going to get an additional $300 million in the SRF program. And remember, that's the low interest loan program that we access all the time through the State Iowa Finance Authority to finance a lot of our utility improvements like water and sewer lines, stormwater projects too. And since the state is dispersing federal dollars, they're very low interest and their repayment schedules are very attractive. Well, we're being told that the state's going to get an additional $300 million over the next 5 years to make some of the loans 50% forgivable. Well, what does 50% forgivable mean? That if you're not willing to spend the other 50%, you're not going to get the 50% forgivable. And so we're going to have to look at projects that maybe we would have waited to do. They need to be done. Maybe we would have waited, but if we do them now, somebody's going to pay half the cost. If we wait, we're going to pay 100% of the cost, and guess what? It's going to cost more because of inflation. And so these are some of the challenges that come with things like grants and forgivable loans, is you have to spend money to be ready, and you have to spend money to get the match so that your project only costs 50% of the cost. And so you'll see some of that in the budget, especially in the capital improvement program components. So you'll remember in the current fiscal year, when you adopted the budget last March, here's what you adopted. $9.89 per $1,000 was the tax levy, which was a 2.5% decrease from the prior year tax levy. And this was the impact on the different classes of property. The residential property owners saw no increase and no decrease in their taxes, so they had no change, the average residential property. The average commercial property saw a $100 decrease, or just over 3%. The average industrial property saw a $138 decrease, or about 3% decrease. And multi-residential saw a $145 decrease, their average multi-residential, which was over 7.5% decrease in their city portion of their property taxes. And when you compared us against, there's only 11 cities in the state of Iowa with a population greater than 50,000, we had the second lowest property tax rate, and boy, did we come close to the lowest, with Ames having $9.87 and us having $9.89. Waterloo was the highest, and they were 95% higher than our rate at $19.24. And the average of the other 10 cities was 51% higher than Dubuque's rate. So remember, Dubuque was $9.89 this year. The average of the other 10 cities was almost $15. You'll also remember that the mayor and council has made it so we have healthy and adequate reserves. Your goal is that at least 20% of the general fund budget is in reserve. And we're actually, in the current fiscal year, FY22, we're at almost 23%. And if you were to continue this in FY23, we'd be over 22%. So now let's look at fiscal year 23, the budget you're going to be making decisions on this year. So we're recommending a property tax rate of $9.7169 per $1,000 of assessed value. So I'll call that $9.72, which the rate, that would be a 1.74% decrease from the current property tax rate. So the rate would go down almost 1.75%. So what impact would that have on the different classes of property? The average residential property would see a 3% property tax increase. And so on the average property, that's $22.74. The average commercial would see about a 3.5% decrease of their property taxes, or about $105. The average industrial would see almost a 3% decrease in their property taxes, which is about $131. And the average multi-residential, so that's a 3 flat and above apartment building, would see an over 7% decrease, so about what they got last year, a 7% decrease last year, of about $126 decrease for the average multi-residential. And we'll talk about continuously through this. That is the rate, the property tax rate we're asking you to set for public hearing in a few weeks, so you can hear from the public on this question, and then you can actually set the rate. You're not setting the rate tonight. Troy did a great job of talking about the increased residential property valuations, so I won't even try and do that. But the average residential property value increased 8.9%. And all the things that get thrown into that pot are the residential rollback, and all of it comes out the bottom in a property tax rate and then gets applied to the valuation of the person's property. So if you look at the rate, and let's just look at a 3-year history of the rate. So fiscal year 20 we're using as the base year. And we probably will never forget in our lives what happened in fiscal year 20, because March of 2020 was when the world shut down. And fiscal year 20 ended June 30th of 20. So that was the year that COVID hadn't hit when this was established, but by the 9 months into the fiscal year, COVID hit. So that was the rate of that $10.33 that you had, and I say you weren't all on the council then, but the city council set for fiscal year 20. Then in fiscal year 21, so remember, it was March of 2020 when you were having your budget hearings when the world shut down, and the budget hearings you were having were on the fiscal year 2021 budget. And you ended up adopting this reduced levy, which the levy decrease was 1.81%. Then the next year, in March of 21, you held your public hearings to adopt the levy for the budget year we're in right now. That ends June 30th of this year, 2022. That's fiscal year 2022. Runs from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. And you adopted that $9.89, which was a 2.5% decrease from fiscal year 21. So the rate dropped again. And then what we're recommending in fiscal year '23 is that you adopt this 972, and once again, the rate would drop, this time by 1.75% if you adopt that. So now let's talk about property tax asking. So when you apply that, when the county applies that rate to all these classifications of property and they pay their property taxes, how much money is that going to generate? So let's look at the base year. What did it generate in fiscal year 2020? So it generated $22,296,801. What did it generate in fiscal year 21? So that was last fiscal year. It generated 26, well, okay, wait a minute.
20 should be 26, 296.
20 should be 26 and not 22? Yeah, okay, thank you. So that first number, FY 2020, that chart's incorrect. It's not 22, it's 26. And so in fiscal year 21, it was 26,202,000, which was 0.36% less than fiscal year 20. So you actually collected less money in that property tax year than the prior year. And then in fiscal year 2022, so that's the year we're in right now, basically you collected the same amount as the prior year, 26,205,000 instead of 26,202,000. So basically the same amount. What we're recommending in fiscal year 2023 is you don't increase the amount of money that you're collecting in property taxes. You would collect the same amount you collected in fiscal year 2022, the same amount you collected in 2021. So it would be basically 3 years in a row that you would have not increased the amount of money you collected from property taxes. Then what's the impact on the average residential property? That rate that we talked about 2 slides ago, and then the amount of money that is collected that was in the last slide. So the base year, the average property taxpayer, residential property taxpayer paid $770. That was fiscal year 20. Then in fiscal year 21, that average residential property paid $769. Remember, a slight decrease. Fiscal year 2022 paid $769, no change. And in fiscal year 2023, since they would get an almost 3% increase of the impact on the average residential property with the rate that's being recommended, they would see an increase to $791 or $792 rounded up. How about the impact on the average commercial property if the rate that we're recommending gets adopted? In 2021, they would have paid $3,160, the average commercial property. 2021, $3,169, which is a slight increase. Fiscal year 2022, $3,039, which is a decrease of over 3%. And in fiscal year 23, they would pay $2,964. This is the average commercial, which would be an increase of almost 3.5%. What's the impact on the average industrial property? In fiscal year 20, they would have paid $4,714. Fiscal year 21, they would have paid $4,694, an increase of almost about 0.5%. Fiscal year 22, the year we're in right now, they would pay $4,556, which is a decrease of about 3% from the prior year. And in fiscal year 23, if you adopt this levy, we're recommending it'd be $4,425, which would be a decrease of almost 3%. The impact on the average multi-residential property. So remember, this is a 3 flat or above rental apartments. Fiscal year 20, they would have paid $1,738. Now they got an increase in fiscal year 21, $1,897, which was a 9% increase of the average multi-residential paid in taxes. And that was because of a reassessment that year, I believe, right? In fiscal year 22, they would have paid $1,752, so they would have seen a 7.6% decrease in their property taxes. And in fiscal year 23, the year we're recommending that you're considering for next year, 1,626, which would be an over 7% decrease again in the multi-residential property taxes. So when we recommend a budget to you, we recommend a base budget, but then we also give an opportunity for departments to request new things, and we call those improvement packages. And the way they decide what new things they request is they read your priorities, and we tell them, you ask for things that you think will help achieve the priorities that the mayor and council have. And so in the area of the general fund, so remember, we're not talking about the enterprise funds like water, sanitary, sewer, stormwater, parking, none of those. Refuse, we're not talking about those right now. There was a request for, a recommendation actually to fund $1,963 in recurring improvement packages, right? This is the recommendation number. And the non-recurring expenses, so ones that don't repeat year after year, just one-time, one-year expenses, we're recommending $920,000 of expenditures. So there were a total of $4.8 million general fund improvement package request with a net property tax impact of almost $4 million. And we're recommending that $2.9 million of those are recommended for funding. And I should point out, the ones we didn't recommend, it's not because they were really good ideas, and it's not because they don't further the priorities of the mayor and council. It's because we don't have the money to fund them unless we recommend a higher property tax levy. And we didn't feel comfortable going any higher than the levy that we're recommending. So what you need to do is establish a public hearing for February 16th on a property tax levy. And this is a really important decision tonight because whatever levy amount you establish for the public hearing, when you hold the public hearing, you can't raise it. So even if people came and said, well, I looked at all the things the department's asked for, and I looked at the things the manager's recommending, but these three other things are really important and they're not recommended, we hope you're going to fund them. Your answer would have to be, well, the only way we can fund them is if through this budget process we figure out what else we're not going to fund. Because once we set the levy for public hearing, we cannot increase it. So we can't say now, oh yeah, you're right, we need another $100,000 to do what we want to do, so we're going to adopt a higher levy tonight at the public hearing. No, you're not. Whatever you set for the levy public hearing tonight is you can't go any higher. Now, at the public hearing, you can lower it if you decide, well, you know what, we're actually going to ask for less. So to go back through some of the background information as you're making your decision on what to establish for the levy. So for fiscal year 2022, the year we're in now, the property tax levy in the general fund will generate $26,205,437. If you set for public hearing and then adopt the levy we're recommending for next year, you'll collect the exact same amount of money. So you will not ask the citizens for any more property tax money. The rate would actually go down by almost 1 3/4% from the current year. Property tax askings, as I said, would be no change. The impact on the average residential would be the average residential property would see a 3% increase in their property taxes or $22.74. And remember, it's an increase in the city portion of their property taxes. We have no impact on what the county does. We have no impact on what the school district does. We have no impact on what the community college does or any other taxing body. The average commercial payment would go down about 3.5% or about $105. The average industrial payment would go down about 3% or $131. And the average multi-residential, which is 3 units and above rental, apartment rentals, would go down over 7% or $126. So to give you some historical context, since 1989, and you might say, well, how did you pick 1989? That's when the citizens decided to adopt, by referendum, a local option sales tax. And when they adopted it, They said 50% of this must go to property tax relief. So that's what we use half of the local option sales tax for is property tax relief. So that's the base year that we picked to measure everything from. So since 1989, the average homeowner has averaged an annual increase in the cost of their city portion of their property taxes of 1.26%, or about $7.55 a year. Now, it would have been better because the state has what they call the homestead tax credit, and it's supposed to be a set percent, but the state doesn't always fully fund it, so it always isn't the set percent. And so there were they have over the last several years fully funded it, by the way. But if they had every year since 1989 been fully funding it, the taxpayer would have only paid an average increase of $4.65 a year. So you can blame about $3 of that increase on the state of Iowa. So the recommended guideline is that the average homeowner would see almost a 3% increase in their city portion of their property taxes, or $22.74. And if the council decides that you want to set a different rate for public hearing, you should know that every 1% change in the rate generates $273,000. So if you went 1% higher, you're going to have $273,000 more in resources to spend. If you go 1% lower, you're going to have $273,000 less in resources to spend. And there have been, the last paragraph there deals with, there have been some years that the mayor and council has said, well, our goal is no increase for the average homeowner, and whatever else happens to everybody else happens. And as a matter of fact, you would have seen one of the years that I just gave you of the 3 in the past years, there was a year like that where there was no change to the average homeowner. So if you were to say tonight, well, this is all great, all these things you've been telling us tonight, city manager, but you got it all wrong. Our goal is going to be no property tax increase for the average homeowner. So that's the rate we want to adopt. And if that's the rate you want to adopt, this paragraph deals with that. You would have $752,000 less in resources to spend. So that list of all those improvement packages I gave you with this hearing document tonight that shows all the things I'm recommending that should be approved through this budget process, like hiring 7 firefighters, buying tasers for the police department, cut $750,000 out of all those requests, and we'll all sit here and figure out, not tonight, but through the budget process, what those are going to be. It wouldn't necessarily be the ones I just gave as an example. You might still hire 7 firefighters. You might still buy tasers for the police department. But there are a whole bunch of things you wouldn't do that are going to be recommended in this budget now. Now, if you set the lower rate and hold the public hearing and adopt that rate, when you get the recommendation, I will have already made a recommendation on what to cut. But in fact, it won't look like what I'm showing you tonight. It won't look anything like it. So back to, if you look at, we don't have the tax rates for all these other cities, the other cities in the state of over 50,000 yet. But if you took our rate that we're recommending for 23 and you compare it against everybody else's FY22 rate, we would have, once again, Waterloo would be almost 100% higher than Dubuque's rate. And the average of all the other cities would be 54% higher than Dubuque's property tax rate. So we think we do a really good job of being economical with our recommendation and being aggressive on other revenue sources. For instance, our riverfront land that we lease to all these industrial properties for about $2 million a year. Well, there's some cities that don't have that kind of asset. We do. So once we do get the FY23 levies of the other cities, we'll tell you how we compare, and maybe by the public hearing we'll have that. I don't know, because they're having to go through the same process that we are right now. But this, once again, this just shows if every other city stayed at their 22 rate and we stayed at our 23 rate, or you adopted this 23 rate, we actually then would be the lowest in the state instead of the second lowest. When I do these things, I always keep in mind our overarching goal, which is to create an equitable community and organization of choice, and built on the pillars of resiliency, sustainability, equity, and compassion. And the method we do that is through planning, partnerships, and people. And I want to take you back. Remember that slide I showed you, which was the precipitous decline in our population, and then the slow, steady climb out, where recently we finally achieved again our population height from the 1970s. And I said, you know, you might think everybody does this, right? Well, no, everybody doesn't do it. As a matter of fact, these are cities in the state of Iowa that if you look at the change in population from 2010 to 2020, look at how many of these fell in population. And these aren't little tiny towns. These are towns of 20, 30, 40,000 people. And look at Clinton, Iowa. You know, some people might say the last 10 years, of course, prior to the pandemic hitting, were some of the best economic times in the history of our country. And if you lost 5.5%, 7% population during that time, you're in trouble. And these are all cities in Iowa that are in big trouble. But it's not just Iowa. So when you talk about the period of time when we lost population from the 1970 census to the 1990 census, look at these cities how they compare to their 1970 census. And these are major communities. And you look at South Bend, Indiana, the home of Notre Dame. Can't get any more mom and apple pie than that. They've lost 18% of their population. And they didn't recover like we did. Gary, Indiana, 61% of their population. Flint, Michigan, 58%. Youngstown, Ohio, 57%. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of tough policy decisions by hardworking mayors and city councils to make that not happen. And here in Dubuque, you made it not happen. And here are the population statistics for some of the bigger cities in Iowa, or metropolitan areas. Davenport happens to spill over into Illinois. And the nice thing is you see Dubuque there in the middle at a growth of 4.2%. So not only did we recover, but we continue to grow. Now, of course, those aren't nosebleed growth numbers, you know, like Arizona or Florida, but they are growth numbers in a really tough Midwestern environment. And so I think you should be proud of that. But I also think to keep this going, there has to be investment. And that's what I know you believe in, because I can read your goals and your priorities. And I hope that you believe the budget recommendation we're making does work to create an equitable community and organization of choice. I hope as you review your 5-year goals and your 1-year priorities, that you believe we've done the best we can to achieve those. As I said, we haven't finalized the budget recommendation. We're still working on it. I will tell you that there are some of them we did better on than others. This gives you, back to that, the impact on the average residential over 3 years, where you did have decreases, you did have a no change, and now you would have a slight increase if you adopt this. And this is the comparison that I showed you earlier of all the different classes of property, the property tax rate, the property tax asking. This would not be asking for 1 nickel more out of the property taxpayers if you adopt this rate from what they paid this year on an aggregate basis. On an individual basis, it would be more. And that's the slide I'll leave up here while you ask questions and have your discussion.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. That's a whole lot of information for us, and I know it took an incredible amount of work and time to put all this together. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Jennifer Larson, our Finance and Budget Director, everybody who was involved in doing this. I know it takes a I can't even imagine actually how many hours it means for all of you, so thank you very much. So with that, I invite a good, well-rounded, robust discussion so we can try to make the best decision possible tonight. So I'll open the floor for
Mr.
any
Mayor?
discussion. Yeah, Ms. Farber.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so, Mike, I just want to socialize a little bit more of the conversation that you and I have had by email today to help understand the process and how we would make some decisions about the budgeting. And before I ask you those questions, I want to also thank you and your team for a very robust and hearty assessment here and all the work that you do to bring this budget to fruition. And I remember a year ago when I was first here and learning about the budget, how impressed I was with the rigor and basically all of the care and consideration given for all of the projects that we need here in the city. So I continue in that enthusiasm and appreciation for all that you guys have done. And so in that spirit, to kind of better understand some of those things that we were talking about in terms of the priorities, I did notice when I reviewed all the documents that you had sent to us for tonight, that one of the priorities we had talked about for public safety, in addition to all the wonderful things that you have basically articulated for fire and police, was cybersecurity. And the question would be, how does one go about and how does Chris get her thoughts organized for us to take a look at a disaster recovery plan, at a ransom attack, a hack, if you will? How do we recover from those? Where are the cybersecurity systems that we have in place? What kind of firewalls, what kind of software? Is there a redundant data center? All of these things to basically put in the IT infrastructure in order to help us preserve for the citizens their financial records and also all the contractors and the vendors that we have throughout our software system. And so I'm just wondering, is there a short-term, can there be a long-term plan? Can there be a proposed budget? Something to give us information to socialize among ourselves, to kind of have an appreciation about, because I see this, as we did, as one of our top priorities. And before this budget gets finalized, it would be very important for us to take this at least in an initial step, in a short term for a longer term goal, understanding that we may have a crisis any day for cyber reasons. So thank you for continuing the dialogue that you and I had kind of started today to just have a better understanding.
Sure, and I appreciate the questions that you gave me as I sent this information out to the council and you looked at the priorities. So in a short 6 or 7 hours today, Chris Coleman did turn out a report, which I didn't get a chance to send to you until about 5:30 tonight, so you probably haven't even opened your email yet.
No.
So I would ask you to please review that before her budget hearing.
Okay.
And that gives you the framework of what we've done so far and what we're doing right now. Then I can tell you from the FY23 budget perspective, the two things that are sort of spinning around still is Chris Coleman, the Information Technology Director, did ask for 4 additional positions. And I'm recommending 2 of them. But one of the other 2 that I'm not recommending was a cybersecurity director. And so I'm not at this point in time, not recommending it because I don't think it's a good idea or a good investment. But I just thought the other 2 positions to support what we have today and to keep it functioning at the high level it is, I thought were important enough that they came ahead of that position. We'll see by the time we submit the final recommendation. As I said, we don't even know yet all the resources for sure that we have. For instance, the Federal Transit Administration hasn't yet told us how much is our transit subsidy for the year, and that's a number that's over $1 million. And we're being told that all these federal agencies are being plussed up. So we're guessing it's going to be higher this year, but nobody will tell us. So we're hoping before we got to give you the final recommendation, somebody tells us. So I don't know if that position will be in the final list of a recommendation. But you'll see in in Chris's memo, how she relates the positions and the way she organizes the department. And then the other thing that we're looking at is, right now, our IT equipment, the servers and all those kinds of things are in the lower level of a building that's in a floodplain. We don't really like that. And so we're working very hard to find an alternative location. And our work on that gets back to that idea of planning partnerships and people, because we're looking at some fairly important partners in our community to make that happen, not only for us, but for them too. And so we might have some news on that as we move through the budget process, but I don't have any news on it yet.
Okay.
So I guess the first step I'd say is to review what Chris has provided in writing prior to her budget hearing, wait to see what actually is in the final recommendation, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so based on my experience with cyber and IT and backup centers, et cetera, just really appreciative of the fact that you're getting the data center out of a basement. Okay.
Right.
And then hopefully there's a redundancy built in. You could do it in the cloud, or you
Right.
can do it at a non-disclosed location. Okay. You can also rack it and share it, I think, is the taking what they call a data center, where there's multiple racks and multiple companies in that same facility,
That's our
what
goal.
they call a data center.
Right.
And that's another alternative. But I was also just wondering and hoping that we could have an articulated budget for cybersecurity, short and long term. And it's a great idea to have someone to handle that personally. But if not, it's a potential, we could always outsource that in the short term to a consultant and go from there. So I'm just opening up the dialogue again.
Absolutely.
Because I really see such a sense of urgency
Right.
on behalf of everybody who lives in Dubuque.
Sure. Yeah, we don't
Okay.
disagree with that.
So thank you, and I thank Chris for putting that together so quickly based upon our initial conversation today. So
Sure.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Other comments? Yeah, Mr. Resnick.
Yes. Several questions. First of all, thanks for all the great hard work. And I do like the tax rate of 9.72 as our top tax rate. And of course, we'll wrangle about different, this and that. So I'm not going to really talk about that. But broadly, talking taxes with our citizens is tough when you say, well, we are holding the taxes right there. Oh, and your taxes are going up. I mean, you need to pay more. And so is there a quick or correct and yet clear way that we can, when citizens say, well, why are our taxes going up when commercial industries and apartments are going down? Would we say that's because of the state requirements?
Yeah, so, hopefully Jennifer will fill in any giant gaps that I leave when I respond to this. But unfortunately, I know people don't like passing the buck, but in fact, the way the state system is set up is all you get to set is the rate. And then the rate gets applied against the different classes of property. And so if one class went up or one class went down, or if there's a rollback to one that's more than the other, remember the rollback on industrial is 10%, and the rollback on residential is whatever it was, 56% or some crazy number. So when all those different levers get pulled, and all you get to do is set one rate. You don't get to set an industrial rate and a commercial rate and a residential rate and an agricultural rate and a multi-residential rate. You get set one rate, and then it gets applied against those classes of property. So the way it works, as you can see in this chart that I left up here, is that the average residential property owner will get a 3% increase in what they pay. But the commercial property owner will get a 3.5% decrease. And the industrial property will get a 3% decrease. And the average multi-residential will get a 7.25% decrease, because you get no control over any of that.
All right, thank you. At least our local owners will get the benefit. So, our local folks who are involved with the businesses or industries and apartments, they will get some benefits.
Absolutely, but I would really encourage you to take this slide and fold it up and put it in your wallet. When you get stopped in the grocery store, lay it out on the counter and say, this is what happens.
Thank you very much. A couple more. The COVID relief policy that you put in, 40 hours of time or the monetary value, was that monies from this year or are they in this next budget?
They're in the current year budget, right? So was it amended into the
Okay.
current year budget?
Okay, fantastic. And when you mentioned that we are fairly certain about what was going on as far as numbers, you mentioned that, we're fairly certain right now.
Oh, wait,
that-
I do want to expound on my last answer a little bit.
Okay.
Because people are not required to take that time in the current year. So they're allowed to take it any time in their career with the city. So some people could take that time off next fiscal year, and some could take it off in five years from now. And that could trigger some costs. But when you're talking about spreading it over that long a time, the amount of cost it's going to trigger in any one fiscal year is fairly insignificant. But I'm sorry.
No, that's all right, but the point is where is it funded? Is it
It was
funded?
this year.
That's it, okay, thank you very much. I guess my question is, then, if we're fairly certain about what our costs are, does that include an estimated pay rate for our employees somewhere in there?
Yeah,
That we
so-
think we know what that pay rate is going to be?
Yeah, well, so for non-bargaining, so you already have, let me think for a minute, police, fire, and, we have 5 union contracts. Police, fire, and operating engineers, which are like the dispatchers, the water pollution control, Water and Resource Recovery Center employees, the water department employees, that's operating engineers, I think the clerks are, the utility billing clerks are too. Those 3 contracts are already set for next year. They were multi-year contracts, and next fiscal year is the last year of their contract. And so their contracts all show a pay raise of 3.25%. And so our budget here shows the non-bargaining unit employees who don't negotiate for a contract, that they would get 3.25% pay raise.
Okay, so we've figured about a 3.25.
That's numbers in.
All right, thank you very much. And finally, the Moody's rate is a couple of criteria include the debt and the amount of reserve, and we're doing well, and I'm sure glad we have that debt reduction plan in full force. Question about the reserve. I noticed that the amount of reserve, I don't know if you don't want to go out 5 years or so, but you did list 5 years or so, because you only mentioned a couple. And you notice that it does not increase and it continues above 20%, which is a Moody's goal. But I don't know if Moody's considers reserve trends, that
Yes,
every
they do.
year that we're actually we will have less in that reserve on the basis of percent. I mean, it's over 20 still. Do they consider that it's the reserve rate is going down in your experience?
Since it's not dramatic, I don't think so.
Okay.
So if there was a dramatic, so remember, their standard is 20%.
Yes.
So once you exceed that, and frankly, I mean, for them, that's a minimum. I mean, they'd love for you to have 50%, but I mean, it can just get crazy. But 20% is their standard. So as long as you achieve that, you've achieved the standard. But if you start a trend, like let's say every year it was coming down $1 million or something, and you're headed, after 6 or 7 years to 18 or so, no, that they wouldn't like that. Even though you are way over now, they'd be like, well, we don't like what's happening here. But we don't have that trend line. Ours just fluctuates every year. I mean, it's almost impossible to just say it would stay the same.
Right, okay. All right, thank you for your help with those. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Mr. Sprink.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. Mike, just wanted to double check. So if we don't do, if we go with the 9.7169 value, assessed tax value, we would still have a shortfall in the budget that you've presented of like 752,000?
No, so
Okay.
what I was saying, let me go back to that
Yeah,
slide.
sorry.
No, that's okay. This is not easy stuff. Let me find that slide. So here's the slide that talks about that. So our recommended guideline, if you adopt that, that's the top paragraph talks about the impact on the average homeowner. But if you go down to the bottom paragraph, we're saying now if you were not accepting that the average homeowner was going to get a 2.96% increase or $22.74, and you said, no, I'm not going to accept that. I want the average homeowner to get no increase, zero, which is what you did last year, and we were able to successfully do that. You would have to cut $752,000 out of my recommendation to get to that number, to get to that rate.
All right, okay, got it. And my last question, kind of bouncing off a little bit of what Mr. Resnick mentioned about our budget, how much we've got set aside. So what happens if we just stopped setting aside money for a year? Can we do that, or would we have to change something? I mean, just, we've got 20% set aside. Great.
Right.
We just leave it set aside. I mean, yeah, we can
Okay.
change that, but what happens if we say we wanted to take some of that money or something to that effect?
Well, let's look at this chart. So here is that chart that was Councilmember Resnick was referring to, and now that you're referring to. So it does show, remember fiscal year 2022, the second row is the year we're in right now. So it shows our reserves are $17,743,471. Look at every year after that, it's the same number. So we are talking about not contributing nickel one more to our reserves over the next 5 years. Because even doing that, we stay well above the 20% number. That is the minimum for Moody's, which was the crux of that question too. So no, we're not adding any more money to the reserves. Now, remember, the reason you have reserves is in case there's an emergency. So, let's say next year something happens and you said, well, gee, we have to spend $1 million out of the reserves because we got to fix that. And you still stayed above 20%, which you would. It'd sort of be no harm, no foul. But if you made a habit out of that, I think Moody's would be like, what are you doing over there? How are you going to stay above 20% if you keep having these emergencies?
Okay. All right, okay.
And remember, even in the COVID craziness, we didn't dip into our reserves. So the council decision was then, no, we can deal with this in other ways. We don't have to lay employees off, and we don't have to dip into our reserves. Is that right, Jennifer? We didn't dip in, right? And so you took both ends of that spectrum and said, we're not doing either one of those. And we dealt with it in other ways, and successfully dealt with it. Now, as I said, like with the civil service system, we're trying to catch up on police officers and firefighters. And by the way, I didn't mention firefighters. We're targeting that by July 1st of this year, that we'll have full strength of firefighters, even if you approve these 7. And the reason for that is firefighters are different than police officers in that police officers have to go to a academy, either the state academy or the Cedar Rapids Police Academy, for I think it's like 16 weeks. And then they do internal training at the police department. Our fire department does all the training themselves. And so we're able to avoid that, go to an academy for 4 months stuff. They still get wonderful and spectacular training, but we're able to have a lot more control over it.
All right. Other thoughts? Mr. Jones, yeah.
Well, my biggest disappointment with this whole thing, and I think it's everybody's, is the statutory requirement that we deal with the cart and then deal with the horse. talking to Susan earlier today, it's like slamming the door with your fingers still in it. And for that reason, I don't intend to vote for a budget any higher than the recommendation tonight. But I'd sure like to vote for a maximum tax rate higher than the recommendation tonight, so that in the next 6 weeks, as we learn about what could be and what should be, and hear the department's requests and needs, if we discover something that is going to cost $100,000, that there's a way to do it without taking away something else important that's going to cost $100,000. Now, that's not to say that I have any desire to get there or to go find something just because that money could be available. But I just hate to, I hate this process that we're setting a target before we even know what ammunition we have to maybe hit the target, and don't have a thorough assessment of the needs and wants of the departments and the voice of the citizens. It's just, it's a dumb process. I know it's a required process, we'll get it right, but for that reason, I'm going to vote for and recommend that we set the highest number legally possible tonight, and intend to whittle it down as the budget process progresses.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to jump in on that, because I'm actually glad that you pulled the soapbox out before I had to, because I was going to say the same thing. I mean, we make this an annual exercise, too, of essentially describing how our hands are tied behind our back before we even get started with this process. And I think that it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't, it's not a rational way to budget for something. And I think I would love to hear a greater explanation from our colleagues at the state of Iowa as to why this is the case, because it doesn't feel to me like it was a law written with a whole lot of knowledge of what cities go through, especially cities our size. But cities of any size are dealing with the same problem. The cart before the horse example is the perfect one. I mean, this is a great example of that happening. And if you don't mind, I'd like to throw a question in there, and I guess this is to you, Mike, and maybe to you too, Jenny. This is an ambitious budget. It really is. It's actually an impressively ambitious budget, and I think you've focused very heavily on some of the items that we found to be most pressing this year within the City of Dubuque organization. We're not unlike a lot of other organizations that are dealing with workforce issues, with high stress, with burnout, all the challenges that come along with the last 2 to 3 years of this pandemic. But what does make us different is how essential our services are. I mean, you don't get much more essential than making sure that there's water, making sure that there's water to put the fires out and firefighters to put those fires out when need be, public safety with our police department, all these essential services that we have. You've done a great job of targeting these. My question is this: with this ambition and making sure that we want to address all these things, what is it that in your mind makes this rate, not doing what Mr. Jones is suggesting and setting the rate as high as we possibly can at this moment to then be able to whittle it back down? What makes this the right rate at this time? For this recommendation that you're giving us, what is it about this that makes this the best option for us tonight?
Okay, well, I don't know if I have the best answer in the world, but I have an answer. So the way Jennifer and I start every year is our goal is to have no property tax increase for the average homeowner. And we keep working towards that and working towards that and working towards that until we figure out it's not reasonable expectation to be able to achieve the things that need to be achieved and accomplish that goal. So when we came to that realization in this process in December, we were like, okay, well, we've got these, whatever the number was, $3.5 million in requests, and somebody could say, well, then that ought to be your goal. All these people that you pay a lot of money to, your department managers and their commissions and all their volunteer commissions, and They all came up with all these things that they say they need to achieve the mayor and council goals and priorities. So that ought to be your goal. And then you look at what is that number? And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't feel very reasonable based on the amount of money we would have to go over. Remember our original goal, no increase for the average homeowner. The amount you would have to go over that, or the amount they would be paying above what they paid the year before. Well, that doesn't feel very reasonable. So where is the middle? And what we came down to is the middle is to not ask for any more money in property taxes. Our goal to create this budget will be to not ask for any more money. So remember, when we're doing this, we have to have a target. Otherwise, I don't even know how you have a rational discussion about what you put in it. And so we try and create targets in our path to finishing the budget. And every year, we start off with the target, no increase for the average homeowner. And you can see in last 3 years, we've been able to do that. One year, we even went down, and the reason we did that is because the mayor and council in goal setting said, you know what? People are really hurting. I know we feel good, and I think I'm paraphrasing what council member said. We feel good about most years not having an increase for the average homeowner. But is that good enough this year? This year being the year where you did actually a decrease for the average homeowner. And so we ended up with a decrease for the average homeowner. But as I said, you have to have a target. Otherwise, how do you have any kind of rational discussion about what could be in it? So those are the way we develop our targets as we go through the process.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roussel, I think I saw your hand going up, so go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. These presentations are always so enlightening. And what I really like about this proposal thus far is that it does address those employee quality of life issues. We've been asking our employees for so long to do more and more with less and less. And so as that part of this proposal, I'm really excited about. But as Mr. Jones mentioned, I don't know what the number is, but I think it would be good to have a little bit of breathing room. This number that's proposed could very well be our final target. But as anyone who's ever worked with a budget, it's always so much easier to be able to add something that might come up that may be critical than to try and cut things if we are already at the lowest possible level. So I'm not really sure what a number should be to give us that breathing room, but I would be on board to try and do that. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Actually, before you go, Ms. Farber, I was wondering if maybe we could, if anybody has that number? Is that the question you were going to ask? Yeah, go ahead then, yeah.
I've done the math.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so last year, the 9.889, if you take 102%, and Jenny, you can correct my math, would be 10.08678. If you take 102% times no, so what would be maybe I'm not doing my math right?
So the maximum property tax resolution rules is they actually do a calculation of, based on your new valuations for 2023, what would the tax rate be to generate the same amount of tax? And then it would be, 2% over that.
Okay, so what would that be?
Hold on.
So it's not just a straight math exercise where you take that
No.
number? Okay, that's what I had
So
done.
I calculated it quick. It is 9.8088147, and that would generate over what we're recommending tonight, an additional $306,535.
So it's not the 9.889 that we had last year?
No, that's not how it, so the Department of Management looks at the new property tax valuations, which increase.
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
So which
Okay.
means it takes a lower tax rate to generate the same amount of taxes as in the current fiscal year.
So what is that rate again? 9 point what?
It is 9.8088147. So that would generate $26,443,201 in property tax, which is an increase of $306,535.
And so that's the highest we can go.
Well, you could go higher than that. The law requires 2% and above. It has to have a unanimous vote of the council to pass it.
Mr. Spring? Yeah.
So theoretically, 11.7169 could be the highest we could go.
Good,
There you go.
yeah.
And that would only generate, what's 273,000 times 2. So that would be the max that we would actually get, like 6, what's that? It's late at night. My brain's tired from doing math all day, so.
This is why we have Jenny
Yes.
Larson, though, too. She does the math for us. But essentially, so just to come back to this, essentially, that rate then puts us in the bind of, we'd all have to agree. Every single one of us would have to agree. But then if we were to raise it to the max rate at the 9.8 additional numbers there, then that's the rate that we could vote on with a majority, with a simple majority vote of the council, is what we're saying.
Anything less than 2% is a simple vote.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
just a comment. So I've been on the council more than 10 years, and it's my experience that Mr. Van Milligan's budgets have always included breathing room, healthy breath of breathing room, because he's an experienced city manager, and he knows things happen that we might not be able to anticipate. So it's a good budget, and a good budget includes some breathing room. So the idea that there's no breathing room, from Mr. Van Milligan, I would have to be shown that with some hard numbers, because, I mean, I think they do include that. That's just a smart budgeting thing, and they're a smart budgeting pair, those two. Thank you.
Mr. Sprain?
How much wiggle room did you give yourself?
Well, I appreciate that vote of confidence, and I'll take that as a compliment. But as I said in the presentation, since we haven't actually got the final revenue estimates from everything that we have, it's hard for me to answer that question. We think, with our best estimates, that we've created a recommendation that there's enough resources to fund. And I guess I don't know any better way to say that. So, there certainly might end up being a little breathing room when we get some of these estimates, and maybe we were conservative in our projection and they came in better. But I hate to make that kind of commitment.
In the last couple of years, that we spent on this council, we've never had a normal budget session. I mean, so this council that's sitting here right here, we've never had anything that we could call anything close to normal, because the middle of the first year that those of us that were elected, a couple of years ago, were sitting here, then that's when the pandemic hit and everything was thrown in. So, I appreciate, I think, I agree with Mr. Resnick that, there's so much work that goes into this. There's got to be some room there. But I think the thing that's different this year is what you just said. I mean, there are so many question marks yet. And those question marks might end up being in the right direction. I mean, it seems like, we've got ARPA funds, we've got the CARES Act funds, we've got the infrastructure bill, we've got things that are going to be putting this hopefully in the category of extra revenue and not losses, obviously, but we still don't really know. And I'm wondering, as we move through this conversation here, if it wouldn't be helpful for us to give ourselves even just a little bit more wiggle room in this process. And I might suggest, going back to something that Mike said, that having a target in mind. And our target could very easily be this recommendation that's sitting before us tonight. I mean, if we all agree to this could be our target. That we shoot for this by the end of the whole process as we go through the process of hearing all the different departments present to us. But at least we'd have a little more to work with if we need to, because we haven't had that opportunity really, and we might need it this year. So I guess I'm hearing what we're saying, and I at this point, knowing that our hands are tied, I kind of agree that we maybe take the role of going a little higher tonight and then being able to lower, knowing that we have that target in mind. So I'll leave that on the table for any other comments. Yeah, Mr. Spring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if we go to the max, which would be 11.7169, that's only an extra, yes, it is a big extra, but it's $546,936. So that's, yes, that isn't a tax possible, but that's all that the extra funds that we're getting is a little over $500,000. So just to give people an idea. So, and I think if we don't dream big and point and think big, we will definitely have problems later on. So I'm in agreement. I would make the motion of let's going with 11.7196%. And if we can reel that down to the 9, I am more than happy with that later.
Corinna, can you hear us there?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
The device unlocked.
That's okay. I just want to, I have a process question here. We have a motion on the table, but the motion is to receive and file and adopt the resolution that's in front of us. How do we go about if we as a council want to change the actual rate here that is before us? How does that need to happen?
I'm looking at the resolution now. The resolution that is attached sets the public hearing. Let me just look here. Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't see the actual
There's no amount on there.
number in the resolution that they're adopting tonight. Is that correct?
That's correct, because tonight is setting the public hearing.
Just setting the public hearing.
Yep, so the only document that would change is the notice of public hearing that we are required to publish.
And I'm pulling that one up right now. And so that's got the date, the time, the location. And so essentially what would happen is
Now that notice
Number-
has a number in it, right?
that number at the bottom would get changed, right? Where it says the tax rate.
Yes, that would have to be adjusted to whatever is voted on tonight.
Okay, so the resolution would not need to change. They would essentially just need to provide you that direction to make that modification to the notice of public hearing.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, so help me. I'm gonna explain this for myself, and you help me to know if this is correct. So essentially, the idea of setting the rate is really just a show of hands or a straw poll here at the table. What we're actually voting on the resolution is simply setting the public hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, but when you set the public hearing, it's approving the notice of public hearing that goes out. So you do need to provide that direction to Jenny and Mike to modify that document when it goes out to the public.
Okay, so we need to provide that direction, but we don't necessarily need to add it to the motion that Mr. Jones has made on the table.
That is correct.
Okay.
But there does need to then be a separate vote on the rate.
Right.
Because remember, if it's greater than 2%, that vote has to be unanimous.
Right. Okay, so, and I apologize
So,
here. Go ahead.
Mike, do the vote on the rate first.
Yep.
And then do the resolution.
Okay, so even though there's a motion on the table currently?
Yes, because that needs to be addressed first because the motion that's on the table, it impacts the motion that's on the table.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. So we have a motion then from Mr. Sprank to, can you repeat the rate, please, Mr. Sprank?
11.719, or sorry, 11.7169%.
Okay.
Is that right?
You think that's right, Jennifer?
Is it in, you mean dollars, 11?
I don't know, I was just
Per
adding
thousand.
2%,
Yeah.
I was just adding 2% to the current one.
That's the, but that is
You
the
just-
dollars per,
You just stated it wrong. It's dollars per thousand of
Oh,
assessed valuation.
okay, well.
Correct, Jennifer? Yeah, let Jennifer make sure that that's the right.
I don't know if anybody else having flashbacks to math class or, you know,
That's like 20% higher.
right?
20, I'm sorry, what?
That's like 20% higher, not 2% higher.
Oh, was it? I don't know.
Well, I mean,
thought there was the
from
9.
9.7 to 11.7?
Well, let's let Jennifer do some math here and then
Okay,
get,
Sure.
What is the target percent?
I thought we were doing $9, sorry, so it'd be $9.71, almost 72 cents per $1,000 assessed value.
Okay, so you're going for a 2% increase?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So on this slide 36, we said that a 1% change in the rate will generate 273,468. He wants to do a 2% change in the rate.
Yes.
Okay, so that was the calculation I did, and the rate would be 9.8088147 is a 2% increase. So it's a little different than
Okay.
probably what you're saying.
Okay, well, yeah, however you get to the 2%. So how do we get, so 9.8?
9.8088147 is a 2% increase in tax revenue from fiscal year '22 to '23.
Okay. All right. So that would be the number.
It's less
Okay.
than the 9.889.
all right, so we have a motion from Mr. Sprank.
Second by Farber.
Okay, and a second by Ms. Farber. Discussion on that motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Resnick.
I know that we're also asking the citizens to do a referendum this year. And that's something to consider when we're going to also do this budget number. This budget number will be publicized, and there'll be interesting interpretations of the information that they get. And it just, I don't know if the effect will be, how that will affect our referendum question. Maybe it won't at all. I just know that we're going to be going to the citizens again this year to ask for a voluntary rise in taxes. It's just something to consider, and I'll just leave that with you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Ms. Farber.
Yeah, my understanding of the Five Flags is that it could be a referendum, or maybe there's enough private partnership forthcoming that would divert it from being a referendum. So I think it's a touch early to have a definition of what it will or will not be in terms of the taxpayer input. But I appreciate what he's saying, and I understand what he's saying, but we just don't know yet.
Yeah, Mr. Sprank?
Yeah, and the reason, I'll go back, the reason I set this motion is basically this gives us a little bit of wiggle room if we need it. If we don't need it and we can go back to the original one, I'm fine with that too. This is just giving us a little wiggle room, a little bit of space. And sometimes it's nice to have that with all the uncertainty of everything that's been going on again with the supply chain shortages. Who knows, those radios could cost way more than what we're anticipating right now with the chip problems. You don't know anymore. So I'd rather have a little bit of wiggle room in there if we need it. If we don't need it, we don't need it. I'll be more than happy to go back to the original rate that was suggested. So, thank you.
So,
Jones?
Mr. Mayor, the question will come up, what do I get for my increased tax payment? And what they got, due to market forces and other things, but due to the fact that this is a solvent, well-run city, is they got 8.9% increased valuation of the property that they own. That's huge. That's substantial. And they don't just own that. They own everything else here. And look at what's changed there in the last decade. Look what's changed just in the last few years with the B Branch project, with the street overlay projects, with what's about to start changing with the Central Avenue and Schmidt Island projects. Big things have happened to this city and have caused the value of the property to increase, and it caused the value of the city that these property owners also own to increase. So I think the value is there for them. And I don't want to spend a nickel of the additional tax rate that we're approving as a top-end bracket. We're not setting the tax rate tonight. We are not setting the tax rate tonight. We're giving the city manager a little bit of breathing room. And it would be irresponsible, I think, to say, here's the top bracket, when I haven't heard a syllable from a department manager about what they're trying to do and what their needs are. And that's the legislature's fault. It's none of our fault. So there's one little thing that we can do to make it a little more comfortable process and to mitigate the lack of foresight in that legislation that caused this, and that's to set the top bracket a little higher. It's kind of all you got tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Other thoughts? Well, before I share my final thoughts, then before we call this vote, I have a question again. So, Karenna, this one's for you one more time. This particular voting on this particular rate then simply requires a simple majority of the council. Is this correct? I just want to verify that.
Yeah, because it's less than last year.
No, because
So
it's
this has to be a unanimous.
So this is the 2% mark. So we need to.
This is the 2%. So
Okay.
this has to be unanimous.
So we need a unanimous vote. Okay. All right. Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor, even
Yeah.
though it's less expensive than the 9.889 from last year? Is that because of the 8.9% increase in the property values? Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay. Got it.
Okay. All right then. Adrian, would you call the roll, please?
Kavanaugh,
Aye.
Resnick,
No.
Roussel,
Aye.
Farber,
Aye.
Sprague,
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
All right, so that motion fails. We vote of 5-1.
This is.
Mr. Mayor, could we increase it by 1%? Is there an opportunity for that figure to come to our attention?
I know we're asking you to do a lot of math and right in
So,
front of.
the current recommendation is an increase of 0.818%. So that's the tax rate that is currently in the notice of public hearing. I just have to do some quick math here, so. Let's see here. So an increase to 1% is only an additional 47,288, and the tax rate would be 9.7126499.
Mr. Mayor, if I
Yeah,
could
Ms. Farber.
ask one more calculation, can we do 1.99%? 1.95%?
I think 1.99 it will round to 2%, most likely. I did a calculation on 1.5%. That would generate an additional 176,912,
Can we increase it just another?
like to 1.75.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so 1.75% would be a tax rate of 9.78477. just write that down. Oops, did something wrong there. So that would be a total increase over last year's taxes of $453,682. Some of that is already incorporated in this recommendation, but
Okay. So I got, everybody have the numbers they need from Ms. Larson, right?
Right.
Yes, Mr. Jones?
One clarification, we heard earlier tonight that an increase greater than 2% would require unanimous vote, and we proposed an increase of 2%, which is 2%. It's not greater than 2%. What is the verbiage?
it's 2% or greater
Okay.
requires a unanimous vote.
Good enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Sprang?
I'd like to make a new motion.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to set that rate at 9.78477.
Okay.
Second by Farber.
Motion by Mr. Sprank, second by Ms. Farber. Any further discussion on this motion? Okay. Adrian, would you call the roll, please?
Kavanaugh,
Aye.
Resnick,
No.
Roussel,
Aye.
Farber,
Aye.
Sprank,
Aye.
Jones.
All right.
That motion passes 5-1. Okay. So then we return to the previous motion of receiving and filing, adopting the resolution, and setting the public hearing for the date specified on the agenda. Mr. Jones made that motion with a second by Mr. Sprank. Do we have any further discussion on this before we call the vote? And the one thing I want to say before we do is just thank you for the discussion tonight. I think this was deserving of this discussion, and I'm glad that we had it. So thank you very much for the time that everyone spent on it. This meeting was called and not as expected as we thought, so this was a good thing that we were able to do this and have the discussion that we were able to have. So thank you very much. And Jenny, just again, thank you very much for your time and effort tonight. I know we asked a lot of you this evening and continue to ask a lot of you throughout the budget process. So we're looking forward to hearing as many discussions as we can in the next month. So Adrian, with that, would you call the roll, please?
Kavanaugh,
Aye.
Resnick,
Aye.
Roussel,
Aye.
Farber,
Aye.
Sprank,
Aye.
Jones.
All right.
That motion passes 6-0. And there being no further items on the agenda, we will stand adjourned.